The appointment was announced on a Wednesday morning in March, and by noon, the precinct had heard, not through the official channels, the department newsletter, the briefing that would come Friday, but the way things travel in a building where 60 people share 3 hallways and a break room, person to person, in the particular register of news that is too large for a normal voice. The new precinct chief was a 15-year department veteran named Damien Osei. He had come up through patrol, made detective at 9 years, moved to the investigative division at 11, and been appointed to the chief's role over 3 other internal candidates after a national search that the city's oversight board had insisted upon and that had produced after 6 months the conclusion that the best person for the position had been in the building the whole time. It was 41 years old. It was calm, methodical, and known throughout the department for a quality his supervisors had described. Over 15 years of reviews, in language that varied but converged on the same idea. He remembered everything, not in the sense of photographic memory, though his recall was exceptional, in the sense that he understood the meaning of things in sequence, that events were not individual but connected, that patterns spoke when you listened for them. That what a person did when they believed no one was watching was the most accurate data available about who they were. Officer Leonard Pruitt had believed, for 3 years, that no one was watching. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong in the specific consequential way of a man who mistakes the absence of immediate consequence for the absence of observation. Damien Osei had been watching. He had been keeping a file. And on the Wednesday morning in March, when the appointment was announced, the file had been sitting in a drawer in his home office for 14 months, waiting for the moment its contents could be placed in the hands of someone with the authority to do something about it. That someone, it turned out, was him. 3 years earlier, Damien Osei had not yet been a detective. He had been a patrol officer, with 9 years on the job, living with his wife Adaes and their 2 children in a house on Clement Street that they had bought 3 years before and were in the process of renovating room by room, on weekends and evenings when the shift schedule allowed. The renovation was not fast because Damien did not do things fast when there was a right way to do them. And the right way required sourcing good materials and taking the time to do the work correctly rather than quickly. The kitchen had taken 6 months. The bathroom was currently in its 4th month. A had decided partway through the bathroom that the tile work required a professional, and a neighbor had recommended a contractor named Winston Galbraith. Winston Galbraith was 54 years old, the owner of a one-man contracting business he had built over 28 years out of a truck, a set of tools, and a reputation for showing up when he said he would and finishing what he started. He had a client list built entirely from referrals, a scheduling calendar that ran 4 months out, and exactly the kind of business that succeeds in the specific way that word-of-mouth businesses succeed. Slowly, completely, on the basis of nothing except the quality of the work and the reliability of the person doing it. He drove a work truck with his business name on the side. He was licensed, bonded, and insured. He had operated without incident for 28 years. Officer Leonard Pruitt worked the morning patrol shift on a route that included Clement Street and the surrounding 12 blocks. He was 47 years old, 19 years on the force. A man who had arrived at his career and stayed in it without distinguishing himself in any direction. Not notably good, not formally disciplined, occupying the wide institutional middle of a department that has always had more people in the middle than at either edge. He had opinions about neighborhoods and the people in them that he had never been asked to examine and that he had therefore never examined. Winston Galbraith's truck, on Clement Street, parked in front of the OC house 4 mornings a week for several months, had attracted his attention in the specific way that certain things attract the attention of certain officers. Not because anything was wrong, but because someone had decided something looked wrong, and the decision and the observation had become indistinguishable. The first report was filed on a Tuesday in November. Officer Pruitt documented what he described as a suspicious vehicle parked repeatedly at the same residential address, driver unable to provide satisfactory explanation for presence when questioned. The report did not note that Winston had explained he was a licensed contractor working a scheduled job. It did not note that he had produced his business license, his bonding certificate, and his client's name. It noted only the vehicle, the address, and the officer's assessment. Suspicious. Winston told Damien about it the same afternoon. Not alarmed, exactly, because Winston Galbraith was a man who had been navigating this particular species of encounter for his entire adult life and had developed the particular equilibrium of someone who has learned to absorb what cannot be changed without letting it become the whole story of the day. Boutte mentioned it because it had happened, and because leaving things unmentioned had a way of making them easier to repeat. Damien thanked him for telling him. He wrote down the date. It did not say anything to Pruitt, because Pruitt was his patrol colleague, and the report contained nothing actionable, and the internal complaint process for a single suspicious vehicle report was not designed to produce meaningful outcomes, and they both knew it. He wrote down the date and went back to his tile work. The second report came 6 weeks later, then a third, then a pattern. Over the following 3 years, Officer Pruitt filed 11 reports involving Winston Galbraith. The reports documented a range of concerns, each individually minor, each written in the careful language of observed facts that were not in fact what had been observed. A vehicle blocking a driveway. The truck was 6 inches from the curb in front of a house. Winston was working and the driveway was 30 feet away. Suspicion of unauthorized entry to a residential property. Winston had a key, provided by the homeowner, and was working a scheduled appointment. One report described Winston as behaving erratically when questioned, a characterization that Winston's account of the same conversation relayed to Damien that evening, word for word, with the specific accuracy of a man who had learned to memorize these exchanges, described as Winston answering 11 questions calmly and asking twice whether he had done something wrong before Pruitt returned to his cruiser without answering. What the reports were doing, taken together, was constructing a record, not a true record, a record of a truth that had not occurred, assembled from the procedural authority of the forms on which it was written. 11 reports, each individually dismissible as minor, collectively producing something that could be read as a pattern of suspicious activity by a specific individual in a specific area. The kind of record that, in the wrong circumstances, becomes the predicate for something worse. Damien Osei was building a record too. It had a notebook, his second since he began keeping notes, because the first had filled in which he documented each incident, the date, the report number where he could find it, Winston's account, any discrepancies between the report's language and what Winston had described. He had noted the gap in the driveway report. He had measured it himself on a Sunday morning, 6 inches, with a tape measure, because he was the kind of person who did not let a number remain approximate when precision was available. He had noted the key in the second unauthorized entry report. He had the locksmith receipt from the day he had the key made for Winston, dated 3 weeks before the incident in question. It had noted the erratic behavior characterization and compared it to Winston's reconstruction of the conversation, which he had asked Winston to write out longhand the day after it happened. Because longhand reconstructions, written close in time to the event, carry a different evidentiary weight than recollections given weeks later. It was building a case, not because he knew what he would do with it, because precision was the only honest response he had to what was being done to a man who had done nothing wrong. In the second year, Winston Galbraith lost a contract. He had been under consideration for a renovation project at a church on Meredith Avenue, the kind of job that would have represented 2 months of solid income and the kind of community referral that generates 3 more like it. The church's facilities committee, doing their due diligence, had run a background check that surfaced the pattern of police reports, not charges, not convictions, reports. The language of the reports, with their careful accumulation of minor suspicions, read differently in a background check summary than in their individual context. The facilities committee voted not to proceed. They cited the reports. Winston found out from the pastor, who called him personally to explain and who was himself visibly uncomfortable, because A knew Winston from 30 years of community overlapping, and the reports did not match the man he knew. But the committee had voted, and the vote was the vote. Winston called Damien that evening. There was a particular quality to his voice that Damien had not heard before. Not anger, which Winston had managed to keep at arm's length through 30 years of practice, but a kind of tiredness that went deeper than a lost contract. The tiredness of a man who has been absorbing something for long enough that the weight of it has become indistinguishable from the weight of ordinary life. He did not ask Damien to fix it. It was not the kind of man who asked for things that couldn't be given. But he described the pastor's phone call, the discomfort in his voice, the apology embedded in the explanation. The vote? That was the vote. And somewhere in the telling was the thing that was harder than the money, which was that the reports had reached into a community where Winston had stood for 30 years on the basis of his name alone, and had made his name a question mark in the minds of people who should not have had to wonder. 28 years of showing up on time and finishing what he started. And 11 false reports could do more damage than he could repair in a single conversation, because people remember what they were warned about more readily than they revise it. Ed knew this. He had always known this. He told Damien because they had developed over 2 years of shared documentation and a bathroom renovation, and 4 months of tile work, and the particular friendship that grows between people who trust each other with inconvenient truths. The kind of relationship in which telling was its own category of support. Damien added the church contract to the file. He noted the background check, the pastor's name, the date of the committee vote. He noted the specific mechanism, reports converting into a background check summary converting into a lost contract. He wrote it out in full because mechanisms mattered. Because the line between what Pruitt had filed and what Winston had lost was a direct one, and direct lines needed to be documented directly. He had 14 months left before his appointment to chief would be announced, though he did not know that, and would not have waited if he had. In the 3rd year, Damien made detective and transferred to the investigative division, which gave him access to the department's internal report database at a level that patrol officers did not have. He used this access, within the scope of what his role permitted, to pull the complete file on Pruitt's reports. What he found confirmed and extended what his notebook had documented. 11 reports over 3 years, each involving the same individual, each falling below the threshold for formal action, each contributing to a record that was structurally identical to a documented harassment pattern the department's own training materials described as a form of targeted enforcement misconduct. It pulled the training materials. It placed them alongside the report file. He documented the comparison. Then it pulled Pruitt's broader history, 15 other reports in the same 3-year window, filed against 9 other individuals, in a demographic pattern that was either remarkable coincidence or evidence of the same practice applied more widely. He documented this. He cross-referenced 7 of the 9. 3 had lost jobs. 1 had lost a housing application. 2 had received formal citations that Damien, reading the underlying reports against available contradictory evidence, assessed as procedurally deficient. He documented this too. The file, by the time he finished, was 47 pages. He printed it, organized it chronologically, put it in a manila envelope, and placed it in the drawer in his home office. He had built something complete enough to be placed in the hands of someone with the authority to use it. He was, at that point, a detective in an investigative division with a direct supervisor who had known Pruitt for 15 years. He was not that person yet. He was patient in the specific way of someone who has seen what impatience costs, who has watched documentation disappear into processes designed to absorb it, has watched complaints produce form letters, has watched the machinery of institutional self-protection operate with the smooth efficiency of long practice. He had built the file so that when the right moment came, there would be nothing left to build. He would only need to hand it over. On the Wednesday in March, 14 months after the file went into the drawer, Damien Osei received a call from the city's deputy commissioner informing him that the board had voted to appoint him precinct chief, effective the 1st of the month. He thanked the commissioner. He was in his car in the parking lot of a hardware store, where he had stopped to pick up tile grout for the second bathroom, the one they had finally gotten to. And he sat for a moment with his hand on the steering wheel and thought about a Tuesday in November 3 years ago, when Winston had told him about a suspicious vehicle report. He thought about a notebook, and then a second notebook. He thought about a tape measure on a Sunday morning, and 6 inches between a work truck and a curb. He thought about the church on Meredith Avenue, and the vote that had gone the wrong way, and the particular quality of Winston's voice on the phone that evening. He called Adayeth. He told her. She said what she always said when something had been a long time coming. I know. She meant it as recognition, not as I told you so. They were different things, and she had always known the difference. He picked up the grout. He drove home. On his first day as precinct chief, Damien submitted the 47-page file to the department's Office of Professional Standards and to the Civilian Oversight Board simultaneously. Because simultaneous submission to both was the procedural mechanism that prevented either from routing the matter quietly, which was the specific gap that had allowed 11 reports to remain unreviewed for 3 years. A attached a written summary with a cover letter that described the file's contents and the timeline of its compilation. Stated that he had a direct personal connection to one of the individuals named in the file and was therefore recusing himself from any review process. And noted that the simultaneous submission was intentional and should be understood as a request that both bodies coordinate their reviews. It had thought about the cover letter for 14 months. It was 4 paragraphs. Every word was the right one. The Office of Professional Standards opened a formal investigation the following week. The Civilian Oversight Board assigned an independent investigator. The 2 bodies coordinated as Damien's letter had requested, which was not standard, but was not prohibited, and which the Oversight Board's director later described as the correct approach given the scope of the documentation. The investigation ran for 5 months. Officer Leonard Pruitt was issued a formal notice of potential termination in August. The investigation had confirmed the pattern across the full scope of Pruitt's report history. Not only the 11 reports involving Winston Galbraith, but a broader pattern extending back 9 years, involving 34 reports across 19 individuals, with a demographic consistency that left the investigators' report with no alternative conclusion to name. Pruitt did not contest the investigation's findings before the review board. His attorney entered a resignation agreement in September. He left the department with 19 years of service and a termination record that would follow his name through every future law enforcement application, which was the specific consequence the resignation agreement preserved, and his attorney had not managed to negotiate away. Damien was not present at the review board hearing. He had recused himself at the start and maintained the recusal through the conclusion, which was the only appropriate thing and the thing he had planned from the beginning. He received a written summary of the outcome from the OPUS director the day after the hearing. He read it in his office with the door closed and his hands flat on the desk. Each side what it needed to say. He filed it. He called Winston. Winston Galbraith was in his truck when the call came, driving to a job on Halstead Avenue. His calendar 4 months out again, after the 2 years it had taken to rebuild the referral pipeline that the reports had quietly eroded, he pulled over. He listened to Damien tell him what had happened. When Damien was done, Winston was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who has been carrying something for 3 years and is trying to understand what it feels like when it is set down. Not weightless. The weight doesn't go that quickly, and some of it doesn't go at all. But different. Lighter in the specific way that justice, when it arrives, is always a different thing than you imagined it would be, and also exactly what you needed. He asked Damien how long he had been building the file. Damien told him, 3 years, from the first report. Winston was quiet again. Then he said, "You were there the whole time." Damien said, "I was." It wasn't a complicated exchange. It didn't need to be. What it was true. The kind of true that sits at the bottom of a thing and holds it up. The kind that doesn't require elaboration because the years themselves are the elaboration, and the file in the drawer is the elaboration. And the tape measure on a Sunday morning, and the notation of 6 inches, and the locksmith receipt dated 3 weeks before the incident in question. All of it was the elaboration. And Winston knew it, and Damien knew Winston knew it, and neither of them needed to say any of that out loud. Winston thanked him, said he had to get to the job on Halstead. Damien told him to drive safe. He hung up and looked out the window of his precinct chief's office at the parking lot, at the cruisers in their rows, at the building that was now his responsibility in the full weight of what that meant. Not just the administration of it, the budget reviews and the shift schedules and the accreditation requirements and the community liaison work. The deeper thing. The obligation to know what was happening in the building and on the streets it served, and in the reports filed by the officers who operated in his name. To notice, to document, to remember the meaning of things in sequence. He had been doing that his whole career. He would keep doing it. He had a full day ahead of him. He had always had a full day ahead of him. He turned from the window and got to work.